Start this session now. Welcome everybody to this amazing panel of speakers that we have. The title of this session is Uniting Against Fascism, the Far Right, Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And we're absolutely delighted to have a panel from a wide variety of backgrounds in different countries. This session is crucial because we're facing a rise in racism and fascism, not only nationally but internationally, not just in Europe but across the world. And we can only challenge that if communities work together. But solidarity and unity are not automatic. We have to find common ground, we have to make compromises, we have to share our understanding of a fast-changing situation, so that we can forge a genuine, organic solidarity and unity between ourselves. My name is Julia Bard. I'm a member of the Jewish Socialists group, and I will be chairing this session. Each speaker will have 5 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor for discussion and give people a maximum of 2 minutes each to make a contribution. You can put questions in the chat or comments in the chat if you prefer not to speak yourself, and we'll do our best to pick those up when it comes to that point. But I'm going to just start by welcoming everybody here today. The latest figure I have for people who have registered for this whole conference was 1,500, which is an enormous number. So far we've got 48 in this webinar, and I'm sure you're going to find it very, very interesting, possibly challenging and very thought-provoking. We have 7 speakers, so we're going to be quite strict about timing. We're going to start with David Rosenberg, a member of the Jewish Socialist group. He's a historian, a Jewish socialist activist, a writer, and a long-standing anti-fascist. He's the author of Battle for the East End, a book which describes the crucial campaign by communities in East London to keep Mosley's British Union of Fascists off their streets in the 1930s. He's also written Rebel Footprints, a radical tour guide. 2 weeks ago, he chaired the rally on the 85th anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street, and he's joining us from Islington North, actually from the room directly above mine. So welcome, David Rosenberg.
Thanks for inviting me. This week saw the anniversary of a remarkable act of anti-fascist resistance in 1943 in Sobibor, a Nazi death camp surrounded by a forest near the Polish-Belarusian border. In just 17 months, 167,000 Jews and some Roma Gypsies too were exterminated there. On the 14th of October 1943, 300 Jews took part in an uprising. They overpowered guards, seized weapons, and escaped. Around 80 died in the surrounding minefields. Others were shot by German and Ukrainian guards, but many reached the forests to fight on as partisans. In the forest, though, they were hunted by Polish partisans who opposed German occupation but hated Jews. The few dozen Jewish escapees who survived until liberation either found some friendly partisans or sheltered with Polish peasants. 3 days ago, my Facebook friend, Jan Grabowski, a Polish historian of Catholic and Jewish heritage living in Canada, graphically described what is happening in those forests right now. He said, "Today, the Sobibor forests are filled with Polish border guards, police and army, looking for illegal migrants from Africa and the Middle East. A 2-mile zone has been declared a martial law area, off limits to humanitarian organizations and journalists. Official Polish state media warn the population about illegal immigrants. We are told they rape animals, they are terrorists, local Poles are asked to alert police and border guards whenever they see, quotes, anyone who clearly does not belong here. You can guess, having a darker color of skin places you outside the group of people who, quote, belong here. Tomorrow, when we think about the Jewish refugees dying in the forests around Sobibor, we might want to reflect on the people who face death today in the same forests due to forces of hatred and prejudice. Grabowski himself has faced repression and abuse in recent years from the right-wing Polish authorities and far-right agitators for his work revealing Polish anti-Semitism during the Holocaust. Not just individuals, institutions too, Polish auxiliary police who helped the Nazis round up hidden Jews. In Poland today, many forms of racism feed each other. Anti-Black, anti-refugee, anti-Roma, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. It's similar in Hungary. Yet our Tory government has the warmest relations with the governments of both Poland and Hungary. In the Council of Europe, Tories sit in a bloc with Polish and Hungarian government counterparts and with ultra-right representatives from AfD in Germany, Salvini's Lega Nord, the Danish People's Party, Bulgarian Patriots, Vox in Spain. The right-wing British media, who profess concern at anti-Semitism, but only if they twist it to include political criticism of Israel or Zionism, show no interest at all in the deep, pervasive anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, elevation of the Christian family and Christian Europe that is part of the racist mosaic of Poland and Hungary today. Or they have nothing to say either about our government's collusion with them. When Donald Trump led America, people made simple equations between him and Johnson, while ignoring Johnson's other role models. Both he and Priti Patel are fervent admirers of authoritarian populist, majoritarian ethno-nationalist regimes from Poland and Hungary to India and Brazil. We need to offer real solidarity to anti-fascists resisting these pernicious regimes. Our movement needs to broaden and update its analysis. We have traditionally drawn a clear line between mainstream political right and the fascists, while noting how the former often help to provide political space for and breathe life into the latter. But those lines are increasingly blurred by a new authoritarianism fast emerging from a Tory government that Shami Chakrabarti characterizes as a far-right government. And its direct targets are innovative protest movements, such as Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, human rights lawyers standing up for refugees, and one minority the government thinks few people will stand up for, gypsies, Roma, travelers. Our challenge is to integrate our campaigns against every form of racism with work against this new authoritarianism. As we seek to build anti-racist majorities in society, we must simultaneously build anti-authoritarian majorities while we still can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was bringing us right up to date and with information that we wouldn't easily have access to. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on quickly to our next speaker, who is Barry Faulkner from Unite. And he is the lead on Unite's Unity Against Division education program. And he's joining us from, he's also Unite's political education coordinator, and he's joining us from Stockton-on-Tees, which has also been a bastion of anti-fascism since the 1930s, and where they have a brilliant festival every year now to celebrate driving the fascists off the streets there. The union's Unity Over Division project is working for a trade union response to challenge attempts by the far right to attract people who are suffering real privations and powerlessness and are very vulnerable to attractive narratives that are not necessarily in their interests. So Barry, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you now.
Thanks very much, Julia, and it's great to be here today, coming in from Stockton. good that you mentioned the Battle of Stockton campaign, and in fact that's one of the campaigns that the Unity Over Division campaign through Unite has been heavily involved in doing workshops and talks and whatever else that we can to try and support that really important campaign. It is important. We've just heard from David about where we are right now, and of course he reflected on the past and history as well, and of course history teaches us huge lessons about what we need to do to combat fascism and the rise of the far right. Sometimes that's a very physical battle that we have to have. There's no turning away from that. We need to confront fascists on the street where we find them without any shadow of a doubt. But the campaign that I'm involved in is a huge educational campaign that Unite is running for our members and activists. And it started off really about sort of equipping, doing workshops all over the place to try and equip our shop stewards and our activists to have the knowledge, skills and the confidence to challenge far-right conversations, or the bigotry that leads from far-right conversations, that narrative that's so pervasive on social media, that's so pervasive in workplaces and communities. And we wanted to equip people, to give them those kind of skills and to build that confidence so that our activists can challenge them, particularly in the workplace, where we find these conversations time and time again in workplace canteens and in yards and in factories and offices, etc. We've done lots of work with our stewards, but then we found actually there was a better way of doing this, and it's about actually getting into the workforce themselves. And we've started to do campaigns where we don't only train the stewards, but we actually get directly to the workers, thousands of workers in different parts of the economy, having short online conversations with them in groups to talk about the language that they use and the behaviour that they exhibit, and where that kind of narrative has swayed them, often from social media, to view people differently and to divide people one from another. If we think of it in its simplest terms, fascists and the far rights are there to divide our class, and trade unions are there to unite us. And if we think of that in that sense, and then look at what actually happens when they do divide our class, we find that decent, good workers are pointing the finger of blame for the things that they're suffering, that their families are suffering, that their communities are suffering, sideways at the woman down the street or the guy in the warehouse or whatever it is, because they sound different, look different than themselves, come from a different place than themselves. Rather than pointing the finger of blame directly where it needs to be pointed, upwards at the establishment, upwards at the employers, upwards at the government, upwards at those far-right narratives that they find right across social media and right across every platform. Identifying why it's in the interests of the ruling class to divide us is important, and identifying the similarity between different groups of working class people is what makes us much stronger and makes us be able to defend all of those issues and fight back against all of those problems that we face within society. I think it's absolutely essential that we do campaigns like this and we start to build these actions. And we've had some great successes, by the way, and we're working in lots of different parts of the economy. And let me just give you one example of that, where we've actually had new activists coming through from underrepresented groups, because they see that the union's given a voice to those groups, starting to say, you know what, we need to challenge these conversations wherever we find them. And we've also got employers to sign up to charters of behaviour and language, etc., and to take a view on this themselves. Now, I hate charters, I'll be honest with you. I think they're a waste of time a lot of the time, because there's the kind of things that employers love to tick boxes with. But what we've insisted on is that if you sign this charter, it ain't just a piece of paper that's going to go grey or yellow on a notice board. It's actually something that has a training programme attached to it, that the union delivers, that we train up our shop stewards and shop stewards of other trade unions to deliver that programme worker to worker, to talk to workers about discrimination and bigotry, and to start to look at ways that we can challenge it within our workplaces. one of the biggest things we found when we've done these sessions is that where we have found discrimination and bigotry in the workplace, we've also found huge report backs about discrimination and bigotry online. And that's a huge area for us we need to get stuck into. Workers sometimes feel that they can do whatever they want on Facebook and it has no consequence because it's their Facebook. But of course, one of the things that we stress really and really clearly in all these training sessions is that when you say something, there is a consequence to your words, but there's also an impact. The consequence can be numerous things depending on where and what you say, but the impact can be absolutely devastating on other human beings. People that you don't necessarily mean to devastate in that particular way. However, you're not realizing sometimes that the words that you use can be hurtful, can damage someone's mental health, can put them off work, can make them feel ill, can actually cause huge societal problems. So I believe very, very strongly that this campaign is about equipping our members, our activists, to go out into their communities and into their workplace, feeling confident to challenge those things that they hear, and actually also feeling confident that they have the arguments to put back against the likes of the Daily Mail and the scum newspaper when they put these dreadful lies and half-truths out there to try and whip up hatred, that our members are equipped to be able to counter those voices of hate and division with a voice of unity over that division. Thank you very much, Julia.
Thank you very much, Barry. That was it was very moving and also very inspiring, because it deals with the reality of what people are facing and the subtlety and the difficulty of it. Michael Rosen has written a poem about how fascism creeps in, and he says fascism arrives as your friend. You know, it's not easy necessarily to recognize, and the work that you're doing is absolutely critical in enabling people to understand what they're dealing with, and also to give them the confidence to challenge it very effectively. So thank you for that. Our next speaker is Tony Conway from the Morning Star. Tony, I think you're coming in from Coventry, is that right?
I'm coming in from France.
You're in France, okay. Oh, that's very nice. Tony's activism, though, is in Coventry, and that's, I think, where you live, the home of Lady Godiva, two-tone music, and this year's City of Culture. He was the industrial officer at PCS Union and is a member of the Communist Party's executive committee. He's a champion of the much-needed Morning Star newspaper and very active in anti-racist work. So welcome, Tony, and thank you very much for contributing to this webinar.
You're very much welcome, Julia, and thanks for the invite. And can I congratulate Stand to Racism for organising this conference at a very important time, and also, I would argue, a very difficult time. I'm also honoured to be in David and Barry Raids. I'm representing the Morning Star now. I'm not a journalist. I'm a member of the management committee of that newspaper. But perhaps just start with a report from 2 weeks ago. We had our first physical annual general meeting for over 2 years. And there were two quite clear decisions taken, I think, at that annual general meeting. One was to continue featuring the anti-racist work of Stand to Racism and other organisations, both nationally and internationally, in the newspaper and online, and also expose the impact of Britain's imperialism, one of which, of course, is the large number of refugees that exist around the world. And I'll make a plea straight off that refugees in this country should actually be given indefinite leave to remain, the same status now as we all enjoy. I want to start, though, with an event that happened 2 weeks ago. I want to spend a few moments on imperialism and maybe mention jingoism, and then if there's time to talk a bit about historical revisionism. Challenging fascism, racism, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia is an extremely wide topic. But on the 3rd of October, over 500 people gathered in East London to commemorate the 85th anniversary of the Battle of Cable Street, when working class people stood strong against the police and Mosley's fascists. That protest, call it a picket, call it a demonstration, didn't of course happen overnight. It had been building for months, if not longer than that. It followed on from protests in the rest of Britain, one of which Barry's already talked about, Stockton-on-Tees. It was against a background when fascism was seen as the new and had large support in the British establishment. It was defeated by local solidarity. This solidarity, local workers from Jewish and Irish communities, dock workers, very local. The history of the British Union of Fascists is perhaps a discussion for another day, but I want to highlight 2 points on their 6-point plan and see whether it resonates in today's Britain. The first one, Britain first. And under fascism, being the second one, no alien shall enter this country to take the jobs of Britons, and aliens already who are here and have abused the hospitality of this nation will be sent back to where they come from. They're just two of those things that were in the 6-point plan. Organising against the BUF included women and men, but the key, it was local. It was supported by people generally, including those who were under attack. This is why the Black Lives Matter movement was so important during last year. Now, the BUF didn't go away, but it was a turning point. Today, the far-right groups use local grievances, create hatred and divisions, which lead to racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. Expressions we must confront. We must confront these local grievances and put forward our perspectives, whether it's on jobs, whether it's on housing, on local services, and so on. So 2 weeks ago in St. George's Park, the attendance was black and white, women and men, young and old, different faiths. I found it actually inspirational. It was in unity in action. The organising committee, which I was part of, was worried that people would not turn out. What I thought was good was someone of my age, 65, mixing with people who were 40 years younger than me and even younger. The Morning Star did a wraparound for that day and handed out 3 editions. It included a piece from David. It included a piece on the International Graves Memorial Trust on Spain. But inside the paper as well was an insert from Liberation. And I'm pleased to see that Roger Mackenzie, the General Secretary of Liberation, will be speaking later on. That originally was the movement for colonial freedom. Britain's colonial and imperialistic past and present must be understood if we are challenged to challenge fascism, racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. Anti-colonialists say Britain, apart from the Channel Islands, never experienced fascism, but we did export it. Imperialism and its actions have resulted in mass redeployment and displacement of people, plus the denigration of the same people. Some 20 years after the war on terror started, the US and its allies have left Afghanistan. The Taliban are back suppressing people, particularly with a conservative approach towards women. And yet Western nations fail to recognize the impact of these, namely the refugees and asylum seekers. The impact of Patel's border bill will stop many people displaced due to Britain's wars and destabilisation policies from entering Britain via safe routes. And they will do this by attacking people at the same time. These things are linked, comrades. So to be anti-racist, you must be anti-imperialist. Indeed, as well as retaining troops and bases in Djibouti, Kenya, Malawi, Mali, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Somalia, Britain continues its colonial occupation of the Chagos Islands, handed to the US as a major military base in contradiction of international law. Britain's wealth, its armaments, its trade policies, and its silence is used to exploit and suppress peoples in Cuba and Venezuela. And what right does the Bank of England have to say to Venezuelans, you cannot have your gold back? They do this by attacking the left, selling arms, supporting boycotts, and so on and so forth. But I want to say a few words about Africa, a continent that actually has a size of 30.37 million kilometers squared, compared to Europe's 10.18 kilometers squared. Early this week, Matt Hancock, remember him? He was approached and appointed to be the UN Special Envoy to help COVID recovery on the continent of Africa. He was Health Secretary when Black people disproportionately affected by a pandemic in the UK died. Less than 5% of the continent of Africa have been vaccinated. There are 54 countries in Africa. Have they been asked whether they want Hancock or not? Rather, if the UN wanted to do something in the 54 countries to recover, maybe they'd speak to big pharmaceutical companies themselves. And if we are anti-racist, we must learn about Africa and slavery and Europe's relationship. With Africa, European relationship came before the slave trade. But it's slavery that drove the birth of a global capitalist economy. That is why education is fundamental in understanding where racism comes from. And we must recognize the impact of jingoism and flag waving, launching an aircraft carrier from the shores of this country as part of global Britain and the billions spent on so-called defense. Now, the mainstream media and the state whipped up xenophobia and British exceptionalism. So Britain sent an aircraft carrier sailing to the South China Seas. They also used to denigrate people as well. Fascism, antisemitism, Islamophobia.
Can I ask you to sum up, please?
I'm just coming to a close. Sorry, Julia.
Okay.
Some of these matters are supported in Europe, as David has always touched on, but all these things link together. So to be anti-fascist, anti-racist, we have to also be anti-imperialist. Thanks very much, comrades.
Thank you very much for that really wide-ranging contribution. And just to go back to the things that you were saying early on in your contribution, the work, the success that there was in making Cable Street, the Battle of Cable Street, a turning point, was built on lots and lots of solid political work between communities and within communities. And that's the task that we have to face now. So thank you very much for that contribution. Really important, wide-ranging and interesting. And our next panelist is Nahella Ashraf from Stand Up to Racism. Nahella is from Greater Manchester Stand Up to Racism, and she's led loads of really successful and inspiring campaigns. Notably the campaign against Tommy Robinson when he stood as a member of the European Parliament for the North West. And this summer she organised the vigil at the Marcus Rashford mural when it was defaced with racist graffiti. I first had a chance to get to know her on a Unite Against Fascism trip to Auschwitz, which was a really amazing experience, and where we all talked long into the night, bringing our own backgrounds to the difficult experience that we were sharing. And I know that she has a very deep understanding, not just of the political situation, but of how to challenge it. So welcome to the platform, Nahella.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that. Lovely welcome, and thanks everyone for joining this session today, and hopefully it'll be a fantastic conference. I want to start by saying it's been 20 years since the War on Terror first began, and during that whole period what we've seen is a ramping up of racism, Islamophobia in particular, coming very much from the ruling class, politicians across the board, across Europe, across America, and here in Britain, obviously, with the various governments that we've had. And what that has meant is they have, they went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they use a pretext of fighting terrorism for those illegal wars. And as a result of that, we saw massive displacement of people. We've seen an increase of Islamophobia. We've seen not just attacks in the Middle East, and they are very much the victims of the war on terror, but also here in Britain, we've seen the attacks on the rights of particularly Muslim communities. We've seen a whole host of policies that have been implemented to really, criminalize the Muslim community and demonize the Muslim community. And in particular, you can think about Prevent, which is a piece of legislation that initially came out under the Labour Party, which is now being tightened up by the Tories. And basically, it's a piece of legislation that it really targets this thought process. It's not about actions that are being carried out by the Muslim individuals, but it's about the idea that somebody could get radicalized in the future. And it really puts all public sector workers in a situation where they're an extension of the state when it comes to policing the Muslim community. We've also seen the Counter-Terrorism Act, where, if you look at the data, you're 150 times more likely to be stopped under Section 7 of the Terrorism Act at airports and other ports across Britain if you are of Pakistani background as opposed to being white. So it just goes to show the level of racism in British society. People talk very much about how we need to improve education and all of the rest of it, which I totally agree, we need to do that. But we also have to recognize where a lot of this racism is coming from. It is coming from government policies and narrative that makes Muslims the target of racists. And also, while the government has pushed all of these new policies and I would say demonize the Muslim community, it's really given confidence and normalized, I think, the Islamophobia in wider society, to the extent where, many of you will remember the comments that Boris Johnson made about Muslim women and letterboxes and stuff. I'm not going to repeat it. They were shocking comments. It was absolutely disgusting that he could do that. It's worth knowing that the week after those comments were made, or within that week, the percentage of attacks against Muslims went up 375% increase in racist attacks against Muslims. There's a direct result between what politicians say and the impact it has on Muslims, and particularly Muslim women living their lives on the streets of Britain today. And even more shockingly, we were all disgusted by those comments, but when the Tory party themselves did an internal review of those comments, they actually came out and said that actually they thought his comments are respectable and something that none of the rest of us would agree with. But actually, when you have the Prime Minister making those comments, the Tory party, the party in power, saying, okay, those comments were fine, it's not surprising that racism and Islamophobia in particular has become normalized in wider society. And actually, that has given space for the far right to grow. It wasn't so long ago we had Tommy Robinson. Many of you will know him as the former leader of the EDL. He's been part of all sorts of far right organizations, but he wanted to repackage himself as a respectable politician, put on a suit and tell us that he could represent the Northwest. And it's really important to say the reason he picked the Northwest as somewhere where he was going to stand as a possible, as a candidate for the European elections was because in the Northwest, we have some of the most deprived working class areas across the country. And he was feeding off, I think, and many of us, I think, would agree, feeding off, I think, real despair amongst working class communities who, after, over a decade of a Tory government and austerity, feel really, forgotten by the political establishment. And he was going to use that despair and did attempt to stoke up more racism, and in particular Islamophobia, for his election campaign. And I think it's really important to say, however, you can look at the figures of racism and look at the number of attacks increasing. It is really important to say that there is a positive, because we can push the racists back and the fascists. In the Northwest, when he attempted his election victory, we were out on the streets, we built a mass united movement against what he stood for. And it's really important to say that it was black and white people coming together, campaigning across the Northwest. And at the heart of that movement, is really important to say that campaign was a trade union movement, because actually it's within the trade union movement that we are the most organized and the strongest. And we campaigned across the whole of the Northwest. Every time he tried to hold a rally, every time he tried to make a public speech or an event, we were out on the streets, we were blocking him from holding his events, and we were very much showing that actually he wasn't welcome, that actually he belongs in the fringes and the gutter in society. He's not a mainstream politician. And we were able to win that argument to the extent that actually he only got 2% of the vote. This is someone who very much was in a position that could get elected. And it goes to show that actually when we fight back, we can absolutely push the racists back. And I think it's a lesson for everyone, that actually we have a responsibility to call out the fascists. We can't allow them to have any space. But as well as fighting the far right and the fascists on the streets, we absolutely have to hold our government to account. We have to hold Boris Johnson and Priti Patel responsible for the comments and the narrative that they make, that we know results in an increase in Islamophobia. And yes, I would say there is a massive increase in Islamophobia in British society, but it's also really important to say that when you open the door to one form of racism, it's not a surprise that we see an increase in other forms of racism as well. So here in Manchester, we've had various attacks actually on the Jewish cemetery here in Manchester, and we've had to make a point of holding vigils, coming out on the streets and showing that we are the majority. And I think that's absolutely key. So I know I do need to wrap up, and my key message is we need to build a broad united front made of a black and white people together, where we can push the racists back, but at the same time hold our government to account for their racist narrative as well.
Thank you so much, Nahella, for bringing all that experience to bear on this situation. And that dovetails with what other people have said about the trade union principles being so important in fighting fascism, and also for highlighting the fact that we're not just talking about boneheaded thugs out on the street wielding weapons, or Mosley's uniformed black shirts. This is actually coming from the state and from the government, and we have to learn to understand that and think about how to deal with it as it becomes normalized. So thank you for your contribution. And our next speaker is Cathy Pound from Searchlight. Searchlight has documented and highlighted fascist activity wherever it appears for decades now, and she's worked with Searchlight magazine for over 20 years. She's the coordinator for Trade Union Friends of Searchlight, writes for the magazine and sends a monthly e-newsletter to trade unionists highlighting upcoming mobilizations against the far right. She works locally with Stand Up to Racism in Southeast London, and that's where she's calling from. So welcome, Cathy, and we look forward to your contribution.
Okay, thank you, Julia, and thank you for this opportunity to speak today. It's a shame that you're missing out on hearing from Jerry Gable today, who's not only one of the founders of Searchlight, but Jerry was also one of the intelligence officers of the 62 group, who some of you will have seen being fictionalized in the series on television at the moment, in a prime spot, the Ridley Road series. Jerry really is a real life hero of the anti-fascist movement, and I'm proud to have worked alongside him for 20 years. At Searchlight currently, we are focusing not just on the government pushing through the Borders Bill and the Police Bill that we've got really serious concerns about in terms of breaking international law and breaching human rights, but we're focusing on the far right's exploitation of the anti-vaxxer movement. They've been very successful in mobilising them in a similar way to the way that the EDL, got in ordinary football fans and mobilised people, sort of a disparate group of people who didn't necessarily have a coherent set of views, but were brought under a banner. And that's how they've managed to mobilise people who maybe were against lockdown measures or had some hesitancy or concern over vaccines. They've been very successful in mobilising people in large numbers alongside their own foot soldiers, who those that recognise us, we can see those people there. And those anti-vaxxer mobilisations have seen attacks on police, on Black Lives Matter rallies, on television studios, on health and research facilities. And recently they've started focusing on leafleting schools, because the government and the NHS are looking at offering to some under 18-year-olds who may be vulnerable and have additional health conditions. So just to show you the kind of materials, at a local pub yesterday, these two leaflets were just lent up, on the side. This one is a genuine NHS leaflet, but it is aimed very clearly at over 18-year-olds, implying, if you like, that the NHS has only, considered the vaccine to be safe for over 18-year-olds. And next to it, was this leaflet that looks, it's all back to front, I realise that, looks quite sort of professional in sort of NHS blue and white colours, but it has references on the back to make it look like a sort of well-evidenced document. But inside it has some really worrying messages. It refers to not just following orders, and implies and draws some kind of, tries to draw, links to following orders, and the Nazis having to face trial in Nuremberg, calling on, people who are teachers and health workers, that they need to resist this call. This is a more sophisticated than some of the stickers that we saw early on in the lockdown, the little stickers on bus stops that were anti-mask and anti-vaccination. This will convince some people, they might feel that this is a sort of valid document with various references to Human Rights Act and what have you. But this is very worrying, and Searchlight will continue to expose the people behind this kind of messaging. So we've been asked not to really outline how terrible things are, although that is obviously important, and all of us have done that to an extent. The number of different sessions that there are on today and tomorrow show us that we're fighting on all fronts. We really are in a bad situation. But what we've been asked to do is find out, how do we unite in these circumstances? And I think unity has been, never more important. And as I think Julia mentioned at the beginning, it isn't a given. And in these circumstances, it's more challenging and more difficult to build and maintain. To build unity, we do need to start beating the fascists at their own game. And some of the work that Barry referred to about those communities that may be vulnerable to those kind of those anti-vax messages, and people who are being, losing their jobs, maybe losing their homes at the moment, is really, really important. We've been, I think, as a movement, pretty successful. All of us have been involved in those campaigns at the ballot box that Nahella described with Tommy Robinson, and also street mobilisations. We can do that. One thing we're not so good at, and I think this was touched at by Barry and possibly by Tony as well, is that social media and online, as well as obviously challenging the mainstream media and their narrative with this very right-wing government. So this is something where we have international networks, and we applaud Stand Up to Racism for really building those in this times. I think these online events have actually really facilitated that. Some of the groups that we're now seeing, we can work much more closely with in America and around the world. But we have trade unionists. I think we have trade unionists. We have really good anti-fascist groups and organizations, but they are very well financed. Their networks are international and they're very well financed, and they do have they do use money to manipulate the online environment. Obviously the trade union movement, we applaud the work that's happening at Unite. This is really, really important, and they are the backbone of the anti-fascist movement. I think we're all aware of that. But I think one of the things we can use is, I think Tony mentioned about very localized events and using our local spaces. When there's a national, previously we've all met nationally, and that very rarely gets onto any kind of mainstream media. We were forced to do much more local events and very local events during the lockdown, and I think some of those had quite big impacts. Local people see them. You can also use local media, which often is a little bit more friendly to publicise, but certainly to report on events. Local Holocaust Memorial Day events, the open mosque days, and locally we have in South London an initiative called Piece of Cake, which is it sort of brings together people of different faiths, different communities. You bring cake, and literally there is no agenda, there's no speech, you just talk and share. And tomorrow they're holding an event in a park. Yeah, fine. They're holding an event, a tree planting in memory of Sabina Nessa. Just very briefly, there are other things that can be positive, create a positive narrative. The walk with little Armel, the puppet, who's a refugee girl. She's traveling through Europe. She's going to arrive in the UK. Now, this gets people together in a very positive way, but it is around a refugee girl, albeit a puppet. I think we have a lot of work to do, but we need to be taking action. We need to be seen. We need to speak out. And there's a lot of work to be done, but I think we need to, galvanise, learn from each other, and take on that challenge, because we have to challenge that far right narrative that is winning out a bit at the moment. We can't ignore it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cathy. Searchlight is a completely necessary and invaluable resource for all of us. And thank you for sharing again a very wide-ranging set of ideas and information. You know, the anti-vaxxer thing is really important because it taps into people's real anxieties, which must be addressed, and it's also dovetailing with the government's deliberate decision to confuse people and make them not feel confident about making the arguments that they need to make to keep themselves safe and do the things that they need to do. And so Searchlight addressing this is really, really crucial. And also that local action is, you know, as it can't function without international action as well, but the two must go together. So thank you very much for that very interesting contribution. I'm going to move on now to Petros, who is a coordinator for KEERFA, the movement, the movement united against racism and the fascist threat in Greece. KEERFA support thousands of people trapped in refugee camps in Greece as a result of deliberate international policies, and particularly European policies, as well as campaigning tirelessly and with inspiring success against the Greek fascist party Golden Dawn. Petros is a councillor in the Athens municipality, and that's where he is today, and that's where he's calling in from. He's a very, very long-standing activist, and we're very pleased to welcome him today to the platform. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this very important meetings. You know, Stand Up to Racism from UK is very important internationally, because for a lot of years we are fighting together against fascism and racism all around Europe and all around the world. I want just to explain what is behind me and why I use this picture. This is a picture of 100,000 people, workers, young people, refugees, migrants, who joined last year, 7th of October. It's just outside the door of the court, where we are waiting the decision for the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn. That was a trial that lasted 5 years and 6 months. And that day, this crowd was in the position to listen that the neo-Nazis were convicted as criminal organization, and all their leaders ended in prison. All the parliamentary group of Golden Dawn that was almost 40 of them, they are now in prison. That was the end of Golden Dawn. But the end started before that. It took years of we should go back to 2010, 2012. That was the years of severe austerity measures and attacks on workers and thousands of people in Greece because of the austerity measures. The neo-Nazis, they tried to use the scapegoating by Greek governments of migrants in order to get control of neighborhoods. That was a period of hundreds and thousands of attacks, stabbing, and finally we arrived to the murders of Shazak Lukman, a Pakistani worker, and Pavlos Fissas, a Greek rapper. Before that, they attacked the trade unions of the Communist Party, but also they tried to build a campaign of hate in neighborhoods, a campaign that tried to infiltrate the schools, campaigning by saying Greek jobs only to Greek workers. They try even to check who are the school kids who are going to the kindergartens. I mean, they are MPs. They were asking for lists of the children to control if they are Greeks or refugees. And also, they even campaign for Greek blood only for Greeks. They are gathering groups, going to the hospitals to give blood. So the Nazis, they were there, but also the anti-fascist movement was there. That was a united movement. The working class organizations were in the heart of this movement. So in order to get down Golden Dawn, we built a unity between the trade unions, the migrant communities, the young people, the refugees, and so on. And we oppose them. We oppose them on the streets. We stop every effort that they did to organize the racist attacks, or even gatherings, or even to open their offices. We stop it in the media. The journalists of the Public Workers Union, they stopped them of using the microphones of the public TV. We said no platform with the fascists, and the workers were there to win this very necessary victory in order to stop them pouring their lies against migrants, against the left, and so on. It was very important to open the fight against racism all these years. So the movement that welcomed more than 1 million refugees in 2015 was very crucial to stop the fascists going on. But it was also very crucial that we opened the case for a trial against Golden Dawn. We used the trial. The lawyers of political prosecution against Golden Dawn, they became the voice of the anti-fascist movement. So millions of Greeks, they learned of what was happening with the fascists. They learned about their attacks against the trade unionists, against the Egyptian fishermen, how they murdered Pavlos Fissas. And of course, they learned also how the police were covering them, how the Greek governments, they were opening the space with their policy. So this victory, it was a great victory, because Golden Dawn in 2012, they managed to enter the Greek parliament with 20 MPs and 500,000 votes, 7%. So after all this campaign, they lost their seats in the parliament, but most importantly, they couldn't walk on the streets. So that the fascists stop of their activities in Greece. 1 year after that, and because of the racism of the government, because they open huge detention centers on the islands, because they close the borders, because they are calling the new refugees invaders, that they are invading, and they are changing, they are substituting the population of Greece, which is white, Christian Orthodox, and so on. So they're calling all these refugees coming from countries that were destroyed as invaders. And this is the rhetoric of the Greek neoliberal government. So all this speech is opening the space again. The last month, the fascists, they came back. I want to be very clear on that. They try to use one school in Thessaloniki, and they were attacking the left students who are going there to support the school kids who are against the fascists. This became a physical fight with the fascists for 1 week in Thessaloniki. Organized by KEERFA in Athens. This provoked huge response. Unions, they were there, the students were there. So in both cities, thousands mobilized against them. But of course, this is a reminder that you cannot end with the fascists without ending with racism, without ending with the governments that support them, without ending with the police that are covering them. Just the last Saturday, we had a demonstration in the
Petros, please.
Yes, in the anniversary of the 1 year of the conviction and Golden Dawn, and the police was there to attack our demonstration, to attack the refugees. The response of refugees with women and children is that we don't leave the streets. We are here. We're against the Greek police. We're against the racism, and we are against fascism. So it's very important to build united response to the fascists, to fight racism in order to stop them finding ways to coming back. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Petros. That dimension from Greece is so important from us, mainly because you have been so successful in such a wide-ranging struggle. that it takes place in lots of different contexts, on the streets, in Parliament, in the courts, and crucially educating people in what they're dealing with so that they have a deep-rooted understanding of what they're up against and what the threat is, and have the confidence to challenge it. So thank you very much for that. Just a couple of things to say that so far 1,600 people have registered for this conference, which is an amazing number. And also to remind people that we will be taking some questions and comments. I'm trying to protect the time for that after we've heard our final speaker, and you can put questions in the chat, or you can use the electronic raised hand facility in order to do that. So finally, to our last speaker, who is Weyman Bennett, who really doesn't need too much introduction from me. He's the convener of Stand Up to Racism and Joint Secretary of Unite Against Fascism. He has a decades-long record of fighting racism and fascism. And I'm just going to hand over to him and say thank you, Weyman, for all of the work that you're doing, and welcome to the platform this afternoon.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the panel for speaking about what we're doing today and what we've done both past, present and future. We've fought fascism and racism for the last couple of decades. It's the anniversary, actually, of the defeat of the EDL at Walthamstow. And the reason why I say that is because one of the speakers is Colette Levy, who's a Holocaust survivor from France. She spoke on that demonstration. And I think it's somewhat ironic that a Holocaust survivor has to speak about what happened before fighting the Nazis and has to speak out today. And it connects us with honor. Also on that demonstration was the daughter of Mohammed Salim, who was murdered by Pavlo Lapshin, who was a Latvian national who flew all the way to Birmingham to network with the other fascists to murder an 82-year-old Muslim father on the streets of Birmingham. It tells us that there's a connected international network. The other thing that I want to bring up very quickly is the question of the attack on the US Capitol building that took place last year. Don't forget the T-shirts that people wore. Camp Auschwitz. There were 6 MWE. 6 million wasn't enough. And the reason why I raise that is because we have to understand that our enemy, we have to understand fascism, in my opinion, is more than authoritarianism. It's more than racist. It's an organized group of people that want to smash all democratic institutions in society. And in the 21st century, and how they form and how we defeat them is important, that we understand what we've done. I'll talk about from the British perspective. To be honest, the first demonstration I went on was one that was organized by Jeremy Corbyn in Wood Green. I was a child. I didn't understand why I was on the demonstration. I knew I was against the National Front. That's why I was on there. But we did destroy the National Front. The United Front, the Anti-Nazi League, Rock Against Racism, did destroy the United Front by having a tradition of black and white unity, by saying that if you were black, gay, Jew, the question of disability, wherever you were from, there's unity was the key to be able to do that. And our thousands, we defeated them. And I think that method, we have to remember that method. And what Barry said was important. I've always known something. The reason why the fascists have really fundamentally broken through in Britain is the actual establishment of the trade unions, that the working class, organised great working class, with leadership together, collective leadership, with different communities, has always been able to stop them. I'm not saying that's automatic. I actually think we face greater challenges than we did inside the past, because I would say there's 3 forms that racism and fascism appear to us today. Organised fascist groups, racist populist groups. These are people that support racism, together with authoritarian states. So all 3 interrelate and come together at different points and are affecting the way of what we're trying to do. And we have to understand this. The first thing to do, I keep repeating this, we can defeat these people. I think sometimes we're often confronted by the reality, whether it's, at the heart of our society is racism in the way that it's organized. There is constant attempt to divide us, but we can defeat this. I'm not being trite about that. I'm just saying that that's an important thing to do. But when you look at the organizations we've destroyed, the British National Party, I don't know if people remember a figure called Nick Griffin, the one that cried after we destroyed the MEP. We shouldn't forget he got 1 million votes though. It wasn't something which was automatic. And I think that they changed their strategy going to streets or elections. And we have to combine both the kind of popular movement that challenges them in terms of culture. It matters, actually, that, that people took the knee. And in the football terraces, the show racism red card, in terms of making sure that they don't get the space that they need. But also, it's important that we've always confronted them. We've never let them march. We didn't let them march in Manchester. We didn't let them march in Bolton. We broke what they're trying to do. Part of what they're trying to do, I think, is emulate what's happened in France. And I think France is a warning to us. I think what's happening around Le Pen and Zemmour, Eric Zemmour, I haven't got time to go through it with it, but you see this interrelationship. You see the fascists like Le Pen open up the space, and then someone like Eric Zemmour, a racist populist, even with more, somebody who's supported by Le Pen Jr., use that space to build up. I think we're going to face the legitimization of some of those ideas right now, and we have to fight to make sure that they're opposed. That's part of the reason why, central to what we do, we have to make sure that refugees are welcomed. The idea of othering people, saying they don't belong, is a central part of what we face with both fascism. And actually, I think that if you look what's happened with the Conservative Party, they've, in order to get the UKIP vote, UKIP beat both the Tories and the Labour Party in the election, the European election. In order to do that, they amalgamated, in some senses, some of those ideas. I'm not arguing the Tory party is a fascist party. I'm saying they've taken on some of the ideas of UKIP and some of their supporters. And you can see that in the way that people like Priti Patel behave and the way that the government behaves in terms of mobilising racist ideas in order to pull together a unity around themselves. And that gives a space for the fascists to develop. So I can see that I know I have to stop to let people to finish, but I want to repeat the three things. We smashed the BNP, we smashed the EDL, we broke the backbone of the Football Lads Alliance. There's a strong anti-racist tradition, and it doesn't come from nowhere. I was taught by the people that fought at the Battle of Cable Street, by the people from Lewisham, both Jewish, Muslim, black, white, and from the left, actually, socialists, who were part of the heartbeat of the fight back against racism and fascism. And that's what we've got to hold on to. We have a tradition, we have a method, and we have if we apply that method, we can win, but we face tremendous problems as we go forward, and we have to fight on all those fronts. So thank you very much that's what I wanted to say. And I think it's been a good panel. I hope for everybody saying that the rest of the meetings will have to cover the things that I haven't got to say. So I'm sorry, Julie, if I talk too much again, as I said, but I'm shutting up now. I obey the chair. I obey the chair. I want to make that clear. I want to make that clear to people. The other final thing I want to say is it's UN Anti-Racism Day, where we bring everybody together, and everybody's welcomed on that. There was a question raised in Germany. I think it's very important that we unite all the movements that took place. It's important that you can bring everybody together, regardless of where they stand on different questions, where they stand on questions of the Palestinians, wherever they stand on that question, they should be united in a fight against the Nazis, because we have to learn the lesson of what it said outside Auschwitz. Those people that don't learn the lessons of the past are doomed to repeat it. So our starting point is why you have to break far-right organizations and make sure characters like Hitler and Mussolini never take power. And for that reason, we say that we should unite together. We also say that only Nazis should be no platformed, only fascists should be no platformed. Everybody else we'll argue with, but we want everybody together on the 19th of March this year to come out and march and oppose all forms of racism, fascism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and all forms of oppression. We should come out together on that day. So I'll be happy to join our friends and comrades in Germany and across the world on the 56 other demonstrations. So I hope that answers that question, and I'll stop there.